I'm director Andres Veiel.
And I'm the producer Sandra Maischberger, and our film Riefenstahl is now available on Kino Film Collection.
Hi, Andres. Hi, Sandra. Thank you guys so much for joining Five Questions with Kino Lorber. Very excited to chat about your fantastic documentary, Riefenstahl. For me, this is like a definitive final word on the life and work of Leni Riefenstahl. So my first question for you is, the impetus behind this documentary was the opportunity to go through her estate, right, and the 700 boxes that she left behind following the death of her husband, Horst. Was there something that you were hoping to find in those boxes for your documentary? And was there something that was very surprising to you that you found?
When I jumped in 2020, so it was a long search, but we found a lot of findings of little items like diaries, like private films that really surprised me because I always wanted to get some sort of close-up. Because there are already 3 films done with Leni Riefenstahl, and the estate was some sort of chance to get closer to the character, but also to the main question, what does Leni Riefenstahl mean for today? So these 2 questions were something like the magnet to go into these 700 boxes. And of course, there were a lot of surprises to get a close-up also of her childhood, which she not really, she didn't mention it so much in the printed memoirs, but for example, there were drafted papers, and we got a lot of information, a lot of insight, which we didn't know before. And this was the starting point to get curious and to make the film.
Well, for me, it was because I did an interview with Leni Riefenstahl 25 years ago. I had one big question about her. My question was, why did she turn wrong? Why did she, who invented her life so bravely in the 20s of the last century, being a woman to make a difference of her life? She became an actress, she became a director, she became a producer, and then she met Hitler and she started to make films for him. And I wanted to know, why did she do it? Was she just an opportunist, or was she somehow linked to the ideology? And yes, the surprise for me was because we knew that she deleted a lot of stuff in her archive, but she left enough evidence for me to answer this one big question. Yes, she was I think, a fascist in her mind even before she met Hitler. This made her go and seek him and to work for him. So that was the one thing that I wanted to know, and I found the answers in the boxes.
I called it the lessons, to edit a little bit, to go deeper into it. 2 lessons who made her become a fascist. And actually, it started quite early, and something we found in the drafts of her memoirs to see how brutally she was educated. She was thrown into the water as a little child, and she had to learn how to swim. And she was drowned, actually, very close to die. And this was a lesson: you have to be strong. You have to be stronger than anybody else. And at the same time, to contempt the weakness. First of all, her inner weakness, but then the weakness was projected to others. Later on, the Jews, later on, crippled people and handicapped people. So it was something like a lesson, and that's something for me to learn more about the deeper reasons how she became what she was in the very end, as Sandra said, a fascist. We had to look in the decades before, and there we found a lot in her archives, in her estates. And so it was not just to repeat she was lying and she was creating a lot of legends. No, it was much more something like beyond the moral issue, to learn how and why she had to lie. And then it started really to get very, very interesting and demanding at the same time.
Yeah, those childhood bits really paint a very full picture of this person. So I'm going to ask my questions a little bit out of order, but I think in a lot of ways, her biggest obstacle was herself, right? She, after the war, she tried so hard to cleanse her image, rewrite her history, but she couldn't help but take credit for her work. She tried to distance herself from Hitler, but she clearly loved the fame of being part of his inner circle. She didn't like the talk show hosts, how they interrogated her, but she kept making appearances. And Sandra, you even called her an Insta girl long before Instagram, which I thought was so fascinating. So my question to you is ultimately, what do you think was stronger, her fascist ideology or her vanity?
Well, I think
think
it's
it,
both. It both comes out on the same route. I think people who are drawn to this, ideology of strengths and not the opposite of weakness. Absolutely, they have to be obsessed about themselves too. So I think being what she was drew her to fascism because she was not a political person. She was someone with instincts. And the first instinct is to put yourself first. And then it's very easy from there to stop to be, to have empathy with other people. And so I think it's both two sides of the same medal.
and you see regarding her vanity, that was something from the very, very young age at 20, when you see all the pictures and photos from her, how she knew to stage herself. Today, we would say it's this private, so-called private Instagram stories. She did it in the 20s, being the star in the mountain films, but she also tried to control everything of her image, of how she came across at the age of 100. It's the last scene of the film. You can
Right.
watch it, how much she's dwelled by the way, well, she wants to control it, everything, every wrinkle till the very end. And
Absolutely.
we had a lot of films, and that in a way private films, and that's interesting to watch them. Why? Because there you can see how much she wanted to fix at the same time. Every part of her life she wanted to control, and she wanted to be kept. And that was a challenge for us because sometimes it was actually too private. We had her in the bathtub. We had her some hours before she died, even she was filmed. So till the very end, everything for the
Wow.
posterity.
Wow. I mean, in a lot of ways, she was an early influencer, content creator, except she wasn't sponsored by brands. She was sponsored by the Nazi Party, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So was there something, long before this documentary, there was already substantial evidence that she was complicit in the atrocities of the Nazi regime. Was there something you found, a piece of evidence, a document, a photograph, audio clip that exposed her complicity beyond a shadow of
Yeah,
a doubt?
yeah, sure. It was the letter for me. It was the Konski episode. She was a war correspondent in Poland in the first week. And we found a letter regarding her role. She was not only filming, she was present at one of the first massacres of Jews in the second week of September 1939. And she always denied and said I was far away. Yes, there were some shots. In the end, some people, Polish people, she said, died. But in fact, it were Jews. 22 Jews were killed. And in this letter, which we found in the estate, this adjutant tells another story. She was not only an eyewitness of the first massacre, maybe she was even a catalyst. Why? Because she gave a stage direction. She wanted to film the courageous German soldiers and not the so-called dirty Jews who had to dig the grave for the German soldiers. And she wanted to get the Jews off, and she shouted Jews out, Jews out of the image. And then there was the Jews panicked and they ran away, and that's what the adjutant describes. In the end, she was not responsible for the massacre, but she was a catalyst, and that shows how deeply she was involved in the regime and in the cruelties of the regime, in the atrocities.
Yes.
And maybe because of that, her guilt complex, the question she had to deny and repress the guilt, was much more evident for me. And that's why this finding was so important. It really shifted somehow the image of Leni Riefenstahl.
For me, it was more the small bits and pieces that made me picture her as not only sharing the ideology, but being an activist, a Nazi activist. This maybe is the right way to characterize what she did, because she was not a party member, but she was an active spreader of the propaganda and ideology. There is this letter, you know, she comes down to Venice, and she finds a flower bouquet from the Führer, from Adolf Hitler. And she thanks him in a letter, and she says, you know, the propaganda is much bigger than we thought concerning the film about the Olympic Games in 36. And she always denied after the war that she did propaganda. And here she is writing a letter to the Führer and saying the propaganda is much bigger than we thought it was. Or even then later, when she's on the phone, she was taping many phone calls, and she was on the phone with someone, and they talked about the Nazi era. And this guy says, you know, it will take some time, and we get back to where we were. And it's clear that she had a longing for the Nazi episode, that she missed this time. So she still, and that was really something she kept on until the end of her life. There's so much evidence of how deep she was intrigued, that it puts together a puzzle that had holes before, and now for me is completed.
That was
Yeah,
the final line, right?
add,
Right.
yeah, to add the phone calls regarding the findings. This was also for me the biggest surprise, how deeply she was involved till the very end in the ideology. When you think of the last sentences of the film, this guy who says it will take 1 or 2 generations, then we come back, return to the values. He doesn't say Nazi regime, but that's what he means: virtue, decency, order. And she says, yes, the German predestined for it. And so you see, she's waiting, and 1 or 2 generations, that's right now. And that was regarding the question, what does she mean for today? This is the crucial point. It's right now. We have the longing for simple solutions. We experience the longing for scapegoating, for the separation of us and them. And so for me, it was not only the estate, it was always the second question. I felt it's so current, it's so topic, what we experience in her estate, which was actually 50, 60 decades ago, but now it's present. It's a story out of the future.
Well, that's a great segue into my next question, which is, given the state of the US and world today and all the headlines, and what, you know, this film and its message are more important than ever. So what do you hope today's audiences take away from this film?
I always said I don't want to, you know, to just do an historical thing. For me, the biggest wish was that people leave the theater and they enter the sunlight again, and they ask themselves, how much Riefenstahl do I have in myself? How would I react to this kind of situation? Would I be part of those who follow and commit crimes? Or would I take another way? So I wanted the people not to think about Riefenstahl, but about themselves.
And at the same time, because we traveled a lot to many, many countries, and the interesting point is some people bring Riefenstahl together with the propaganda of Putin, and others in other countries, it's Xi Jinping. And so it's a very specific and at the same time universal offering. The film Riefenstahl gives us a chance to ask the basic questions: how easily we get seduced by propaganda? How does propaganda reach such a lot of people today? Again, why there's a longing for fake news, for lies, for legends. So it's not a moral question, but it's not the guy who lies, but there's a longing for it. People don't want to deal with a complex truth. And so all these challenges are so current, and we have to deal with them. And I think that's an experience I made already in the United States. I had always crowds of people after the screening, after the Q&A, who wanted to share something. and who somehow they are triggered to tell me some experience regarding fake news, regarding specific orders or things, regulations they have to deal with. And so it triggers a lot. And that's something, as a filmmaker, I just want to have these debates. I want to have these discussions and to see the film is moving, is changing even something in the heart and in the minds of the audience. And that's a great gift.
I think all those, audience stories that it just shows how pressing more than ever this film is. Let's end on a more of a not light question, but a filmmaking question. Can you talk us through the process of going through all these boxes and piecing everything together to construct this film, what that was like?
Oh, it was really a challenge. We had a luxury situation, first of all. We had 3 editors, and okay, of course, 700 boxes, it takes a lot of time, but it's not a situation where you just put scene A to scene C and to scene Z, and then it's done, because there's always a challenge. What kind of story we want to tell? If we bring in, for example, too much of her childhood and the experience of violence, do we, in the very end, exonerate her, excuse her regarding her responsibility? So it was always a question to balance different kind of necessities. And we could have make a film of 500 hours. So it was really, and maybe 1,000 different films. So it was a long process, and it was quite interesting to work with Sandra, because she came sometimes from outside and was looking and with a fresh view on it. And we had a lot of debates and interesting debates, because sometimes we are just blinded with all the footage, and then it's good to have someone from outside to look at it and to discuss it. And also in the editing rooms, we had huge debates. I was always the psychologist who wanted to understand Leni Riefenstahl, because I was interested, especially in the childhood experiences and the experience of violence and others. For example, we had an editor from Mexico, and he said, Andres, shut up, just celebrate her a little bit as a great artist. And of course, this was a different experience and different perspective. And in the very end, I had to defend my perspective. I'm the director, because I'm liable in the very end. But these discussions were quite productive to see the German heritage. Of course, if you want, I'm the grandson of a general of the Second World War who was dealing with a lot of guilt, with a lot of atrocities. And so I have another perspective than somebody from Mexico, who just looks at Riefenstahl and considering more her role as an artist. And I always said in the editing room, we can't separate aesthetics from politics, especially in the case of Riefenstahl. It's one and the same thing. And it's dangerous to separate it and to celebrate her, because you saw it in Olympia, in the part of Olympia. And of course, the celebration of the strongness always meant the contempt of the weakness. And in the very end, when we look into history, after contempting, following is excluding, and then it's killing in the very end. And that's something we have to consider when we deal with Riefenstahl.
I would add 2 things. First, the research, of course, was the major part. It took a very long time, because obviously 700 boxes, which were not as sorted as we thought. And especially there were, as I said, there were the missing parts. So this process not only meant to go through the boxes, but it meant to fill in what was missing. So we did research in archives in Poland, in France, in the States, to find the parts Riefenstahl didn't want us to find. So that was a very important task at this stage. And the other thing, when we thought about who can do this film, And we thought about Andres for many reasons. First, as he said, he's a psychologist. Second, he's a political figure and he has a political perception of the world. And the third thing, and that most important, was, you know, dealing with one of the greatest directors of film history. For us, it was clear that this documentary would have to be more than just, you know, telling some pieces of the archive. I wanted it to be an artwork that stands for itself. You know, going over Riefenstahl and being valuable as a film, as an artwork. And that was something that Andres brought in with his team as well. So many reasons for that. And yeah, the art of it is that they are searching. They are not going, you know, I'm a journalist. For me, it's A, B, C. They start with C, then they go to Z, and then maybe they come back to A. So it's a complete different approach to making a film, a documentary. And I think this is what makes this film so special. It is an artwork. It is much more than just a documentary telling.
Yeah, and I think Sandra mentioned it. I was really lucky with the free editors because sometimes I was also a bit straightforward. I want to get results. And sometimes they told me, Anders, stay out. Give us 1 hour, 1 day without looking behind our shoulders, pushing us all the time, bringing new ideas. We could do it like this. Let's put this to that. No, let's
Sometimes,
just let us work.
yeah. Sometimes I
And
had to.
that was funny because I had to learn patience, and I think Sandra had to learn patience too, because as she said, she wanted to get also results even quicker than I do. So we had to learn from each other a little bit, I would say. But now she's laughing, you know. So
Yeah, because you know, no, because being quick is not what Andres Veiel is known for. It's not his
normally
image.
I always
I knew what I was going to have in the editing room. So
I warned her from the very beginning. I said, Sandra, in your films, you have 30, 35 editing days. That's just the starting point for us.
well, I had films with more, but you know, you were not the only one who warned me. I did my research before, and still we did this film. No, but it's worth it because in the end, this is an artwork, and it's the composition of it is something which is still fascinating me when I look at it.
I mean, the end result is definitely, I think, worth the wait. And I think you guys sounded like you had a dream team and you achieved everything you wanted to achieve. It is an artwork. It's, you know, it really paints a full picture of this person and her legacy. And the message resonates more than ever today. So I feel like it's just the perfect trifecta.